The macabre history of the Fenwicks. They kept 12 kids in a subterranean maze. The dusty archives of the Salem Historical Society had housed thousands of forgotten documents for over a century, but none would prove as disturbing as the collection that historian Dr. Margaret Chun discovered in the winter of 2024. Hidden within a mislabeled box of colonial property deeds was a leather-bound journal that would expose one of New England's most horrific family secrets, a tale of wealth, madness, and children who disappeared into darkness beneath one of Massachusetts' most prestigious estates. The Fenwick Manor had dominated the landscape of Salem's outskirts since 1701, when shipping magnate Josiah Fenwick built the sprawling Gothic mansion on 200 acres of prime Massachusetts countryside. For over 3 centuries, the Fenwick family had been pillars of New England society, their fortune built on maritime trade, their influence extending through banking, politics, and high society. The family's reclusive nature was attributed to old money eccentricity rather than anything more sinister. Dr. Chun's discovery began with what appeared to be routine property records from the 1920s, but hidden within these mundane documents was a journal written by Dr. Edmund Fenwick, the family patriarch during the estate's darkest period. The journal, written in a mixture of medical terminology and biblical references, documented what Edmund called his grand experiment, a systematic study of human behavior and adaptation that would span nearly 2 decades. According to Edmund's meticulous records, the experiment had begun in 1923 when he commissioned the construction of what he described as a behavioral laboratory beneath the manor's foundation. Using his considerable wealth and connections, he had hired discreet contractors to excavate and construct an elaborate underground complex designed specifically for what he termed longitudinal psychological observation of developing subjects. The underground facility was described in Edmund's journal as a masterpiece of cruel engineering. The subterranean space had been designed as a maze, a complex network of interconnected chambers, corridors, and dead ends that could be reconfigured at will through the use of movable walls and hidden passages. The maze covered nearly 3 acres beneath the estate, with multiple levels connected by stairs, ramps, and chutes that could be sealed or opened, depending on the requirements of Edmund's experiments. The subjects of these experiments were 12 children, acquired through various means that Edmund's journal detailed with clinical detachment. Some had been purchased from impoverished families during the Great Depression. Others had been kidnapped from orphanages and institutions, where their absence would be less likely to trigger investigations. Each child had been selected for specific characteristics: age, intelligence, physical capabilities, and psychological profiles that Edmund believed would provide valuable data for his research. The journal revealed that Edmund Fenwick had been attempting to study human adaptation, problem-solving, and social behavior under conditions of extreme stress and isolation. He had convinced himself that his work represented groundbreaking research that would advance human understanding of psychology and behavior. In reality, he was conducting systematic torture disguised as scientific inquiry. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 14 when they were first imprisoned, had been placed in the maze with minimal food, water, and no explanation of their situation. They were told only that they needed to find their way through the maze to earn their freedom. But the maze was designed to be unsolvable. Its configuration changed regularly to prevent the children from learning its patterns or finding consistent paths to escape. Edmund's observations, recorded in daily entries, documented the children's desperate attempts to navigate the maze, their formation of alliances and hierarchies, and their gradual psychological deterioration as they realized that escape was impossible. He noted their problem-solving strategies, their methods of communication, and their attempts to care for each other under increasingly desperate circumstances. The maze itself was equipped with hidden observation posts, recording equipment, and delivery systems that allowed Edmund to monitor the children while providing minimal sustenance to keep them alive. The facility included punishment chambers where children who failed to meet Edmund's experimental criteria were subjected to isolation, darkness, or other forms of psychological torture designed to modify their behavior. Dr. Chun's research into the Fenwick family history revealed that Edmund had not acted alone. His wife, Victoria, and their 2 adult children, Charles and Eleanor, had been active participants in the experiments. Victoria had served as the facility's medical supervisor, treating injuries and illnesses among the maze children while ensuring they remained physically capable of continuing Edmund's research. Charles and Eleanor had assisted with the technical aspects of the maze operation, maintaining the mechanical systems that allowed walls to be moved and passages to be reconfigured. The journal entries revealed that the family had convinced themselves they were conducting legitimate scientific research that would benefit humanity. They had created elaborate justifications for their actions, portraying the children as willing participants in groundbreaking psychological research rather than victims of systematic abuse. Their wealth and social position had allowed them to operate without scrutiny, while their reclusive lifestyle had prevented outsiders from discovering the horrors occurring beneath their estate. The children's experiences in the maze, as documented through Edmund's observations and occasional recovered writings, painted a picture of unimaginable suffering and remarkable resilience. The older children had attempted to care for the younger ones, sharing food and creating makeshift shelters in the maze's few stable locations. They had developed their own language and communication systems, finding ways to maintain hope in humanity despite their impossible circumstances. The maze had been designed with what Edmund called behavioral modification zones, areas where children could earn small rewards or privileges by demonstrating desired behaviors or solving particular puzzles. These zones were intended to maintain the children's motivation and prevent complete psychological collapse, but they also served to extend their suffering by providing false hope that compliance might eventually lead to freedom. As Dr. Chun continued to analyze Edmund's journal, she discovered references to other documents and records that might still exist within the estate itself. The Fenwick Manor had been abandoned since 1987, when the last family member had died without heirs, leaving the property to slowly decay while legal battles over the estate dragged on for decades. If Edmund's other records still existed, they might provide crucial evidence about the fate of the 12 children and the full extent of the family's crimes. The historian's investigation had reached a critical juncture. Edmund's journal provided compelling evidence of horrific crimes, but it raised more questions than it answered. What had ultimately happened to the 12 children? How long had the experiments continued? Were there other victims beyond those mentioned in the journal? And most disturbing of all, could any evidence of the underground maze still exist beneath the crumbling manor? As Chapter 1 concluded, Dr. Chun was preparing to petition the courts for permission to investigate the abandoned Fenwick estate. Her discovery had transformed a routine archival project into a potential criminal investigation that might finally bring justice for crimes committed nearly a century ago. The journal she had found was just the beginning of a story that would challenge everything the community thought it knew about one of its most prominent families. The court order granting Dr. Chun permission to investigate the abandoned Fenwick Manor came through in March 2024, along with authorization for a full archaeological and forensic examination of the property. What began as a historical investigation was rapidly transformed into a criminal inquiry when ground-penetrating radar confirmed the existence of extensive underground structures beneath the estate's foundation. The Fenwick Manor had stood empty for 37 years, its Gothic towers and elaborate stonework slowly succumbing to decades of New England weather and neglect. Ivy covered the walls, windows were boarded shut, and the once magnificent gardens had grown wild and overgrown. But beneath the decay, The radar images revealed a complex network of chambers and corridors that matched Edmund's journal descriptions. With terrifying accuracy, the excavation team, led by forensic archaeologist Dr. James Rodriguez, began their work by carefully removing debris from what appeared to be the main entrance to the underground complex. Hidden behind a collapsed section of the manor's basement wall, they discovered a steel door marked with symbols that corresponded to notations in Edmund's journal. The door was locked with a complex mechanism that had been designed to prevent escape from within while allowing easy access from the outside. When the excavation team finally breached the entrance, they were immediately struck by the preserved state of the underground facility. The dry Massachusetts climate and sealed environment had prevented significant decay, leaving much of Edmund's maze in a condition that allowed investigators to understand exactly how the facility had operated. The complexity and scale of the underground complex exceeded even Edmund's detailed descriptions. The maze stretched across multiple levels connected by a network of stairs, ramps, and mechanical lifts that could be operated from a central control room. The control room itself was a masterpiece of 1920s engineering, equipped with observation equipment, communication systems, and mechanical controls that allowed operators to reconfigure the maze's layout by moving walls, opening and closing passages, and redirecting the children's movements through the complex. The maze chambers varied in size and purpose, from small sleeping areas barely large enough for a child to lie down, to larger common areas where children could gather and interact under observation. Each chamber was equipped with hidden microphones and observation slots that allowed the Fenwick family to monitor their victims continuously. The walls were covered with scratch marks, drawings, and messages carved by desperate children trying to leave some record of their existence. The most disturbing discoveries were in what Edmund's journal had referred to as the behavioral modification chambers. These spaces had been designed to subject children to various forms of psychological torture, disguised as scientific testing. Isolation chambers where children were left alone in complete darkness for days at a time. Puzzle rooms where children were forced to solve increasingly complex problems under threat of punishment. And most horrifying of all, chambers where children were forced to compete against each other for basic necessities like food and water. The excavation team's most significant discovery was a hidden archive room where the Fenwick family had stored decades of documentation related to their experiments. The room contained thousands of photographs, detailed behavioral charts, medical records, and what appeared to be academic papers that Edmund had written about his research. The photographs, in particular, provided heartbreaking evidence of the children's suffering and the systematic nature of their abuse. The medical records revealed the true extent of the children's ordeal. Many had suffered from malnutrition, injuries sustained while navigating the maze, and psychological trauma that manifested in various physical symptoms. Victoria Fenwick's medical notes documented her treatment of these conditions with clinical detachment, viewing the children's suffering as data points rather than human tragedy. The archive also contained correspondence between Edmund Fenwick and various academic and medical institutions, revealing that he had attempted to publish his research and gain recognition for his work within the scientific community. Several universities had initially shown interest in his studies, but correspondence from the 1930s suggested that the academic community had eventually become suspicious of his methods and the source of his data. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery of what appeared to be graduation certificates and adoption papers, suggesting that some children had eventually been released from the maze and placed with families as part of an illegal adoption network. These documents indicated that the Fenwick family had been profiting from their crimes by selling children to wealthy families seeking to adopt without going through official channels. The forensic examination of the maze revealed evidence of at least 12 different children who had been imprisoned in the facility, matching Edmund's journal accounts. DNA analysis of hair, skin cells, and other biological evidence found throughout the complex allowed investigators to begin identifying specific victims and tracing their possible fates. The most heartbreaking discovery was a hidden chamber that appeared to have served as a memorial created by the children themselves. The walls were covered with names, ages, and drawings that seemed to commemorate children who had died in the maze. The chamber contained small personal items, buttons, pieces of cloth, makeshift toys that had apparently been treasured possessions of children who had not survived their imprisonment. Investigation into the fate of the Fenwick family revealed that their crimes had eventually caught up with them, though justice had been delayed by decades. Edmund Fenwick had died in 1942, apparently after suffering a mental breakdown that his family had covered up by claiming he had developed dementia. Victoria had continued to operate parts of the facility until her death in 1956, while Charles and Eleanor had gradually dismantled the operation throughout the 1960s. The children's ultimate fates varied according to the evidence uncovered in the archive. Some had apparently died in the maze from malnutrition, disease, or injuries, their bodies buried in unmarked graves found throughout the estate grounds. Others had been released and placed for illegal adoption when they became too old or psychologically damaged to serve the family's experimental purposes. A few appeared to have escaped on their own, though their subsequent lives remained unknown. The investigation expanded to examine the illegal adoption network that the Fenwicks had operated, leading to the identification of several individuals who had been adopted as children during the 1930s and 1940s with suspicious documentation. Some of these individuals, now elderly, were located and interviewed, providing first-hand accounts of their experiences in the maze and their subsequent struggles to adapt to normal family life. The psychological evaluation of these survivors revealed the long-term impact of their childhood trauma. Many had struggled throughout their lives with claustrophobia, trust issues, and recurring nightmares related to their time in the maze. Several had suppressed their memories of the experience so completely that they initially refused to believe they had been victims of the Fenwick experiments. The legal implications of the discovery were complicated by the passage of time and the death of the primary perpetrators. However, the investigation led to the identification of several individuals who had assisted the Fenwick family's operation, including adoption facilitators and medical professionals who had helped cover up the children's disappearances and injuries. Fenwick Manor was ultimately demolished after investigators completed their work, but not before extensive documentation was created for historical and legal purposes. The underground maze was preserved as evidence and eventually converted into a memorial space honoring the children who had suffered and died there. The case prompted significant reforms in historical preservation and archaeological investigation. Procedures, establishing new protocols for examining properties with suspicious histories. The discovery also led to renewed efforts to locate and identify missing children from the early 20th century, using modern forensic techniques to solve cold cases that had been forgotten for decades. Dr. Chien's discovery ultimately brought closure to families who had lost children nearly a century earlier, while exposing one of the most systematic and prolonged cases of child abuse in American history. Her courage in pursuing the investigation, despite the disturbing nature of her findings, helped ensure that the Fenwick family's crimes would finally be fully exposed and documented. The memorial created at the site of the former Fenwick Manor features 12 trees planted in a circular pattern, each bearing a plaque with the name of an identified victim. The memorial serves as a reminder that wealth and social position cannot ultimately conceal evil, and that truth has the power to emerge even after decades of careful concealment. The Fenwick case remains one of the most extensively studied examples of systematic child abuse disguised as scientific research, providing crucial insights for historians, law enforcement, and child protection services. The courage of the survivors who came forward to share their experiences helped ensure that the full scope of the family's crimes would be understood and remembered. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,